Being nice at the expense of truth slowly conditions a person to ignore their inner voice, teaching them to prioritize external comfort over internal alignment. And with each moment of silence, the distance between who they are and who they present to the world quietly grows. When truth is repeatedly suppressed to maintain harmony, the mind begins to associate honesty with danger, rejection, or conflict, creating a pattern where avoidance feels safer than authenticity and conformity replaces courage. Over time, this pattern erodes confidence because confidence is built through self-trust. And self-trust cannot survive in an environment where personal thoughts, needs, and convictions are consistently dismissed or overridden. Each act of unnecessary agreeableness becomes a small betrayal of self. And while any single moment may seem insignificant, the accumulation creates an internal fracture where identity becomes fragmented and clarity fades. As this fracture widens, decision-making weakens, hesitation increases, and the ability to assert boundaries diminishes, leaving the individual more vulnerable to manipulation, overextension, and emotional exhaustion. Personal power declines when a person believes their role is to adapt endlessly rather than to influence intentionally, reinforcing the false idea that worth is earned through compliance instead of character. The fear of being misunderstood or disliked begins to govern behavior, causing actions to be filtered through approval rather than principles, which gradually replaces self-respect with self-monitoring. In this state, emotions become muted or confusing because unexpressed truth has no healthy outlet, leading to internal pressure that manifests as resentment, frustration, or quiet dissatisfaction. The longer this cycle continues, the more unfamiliar authenticity feels. And speaking up begins to feel unnatural, even threatening, despite being essential for growth and self-mastery. What was once a choice to be nice evolves into a habitual surrender of voice, agency, and authority, reshaping identity around accommodation rather than intention. Kindness and strength are often misrepresented as opposing forces, yet in reality, they are complementary qualities that reinforce one another when rooted in self-awareness and integrity. True kindness is not the absence of firmness, but the presence of intention, where care is expressed through honesty rather than avoidance, and respect is demonstrated through clarity instead of confusion. Strength does not require harshness, volume, or intimidation. It is revealed through calm certainty, consistent boundaries, and the willingness to stand by truth even when it disrupts comfort. Clarity is an act of kindness because it removes ambiguity, prevents misunderstanding, and allows others to respond to reality rather than assumptions or unspoken expectations. Boundaries are not walls meant to punish others, but structures that protect energy, values, and focus, making healthy interaction possible without resentment or self-sacrifice. Honesty, when delivered with purpose and self-control, affirms dignity on both sides, signaling that the relationship is valued enough to withstand truth rather than survive on pretense. When kindness lacks strength, it becomes enabling, teaching others that access has no cost and behavior has no consequence, which eventually erodes mutual respect. When strength lacks kindness, it becomes rigidity. But when the two coexist, they create leadership, trust, and emotional safety rooted in consistency. Choosing clarity over silence requires courage, especially for those conditioned to equate agreeableness with goodness, yet that choice strengthens identity and self-respect. Respect grows where truth is spoken, limits are honored, and compassion is balanced with firmness. Saying yes when you mean no begins as a small compromise, often justified by convenience or fear of conflict, but it quietly establishes a pattern where your internal signals are overridden by external demands. Each time this pattern repeats, it sends a message that your time is flexible, your energy is expendable, and your priorities are secondary to the expectations of others. Over time, people learn to approach you without consideration because you have demonstrated that access requires no respect and requests carry no consequence. This dynamic conditions others to listen less closely when you speak because your words are no longer aligned with your actions, weakening the authority of your voice. As your schedule fills with obligations you never intended to accept, resentment builds beneath the surface, draining enthusiasm and replacing willingness with obligation. The habit of saying yes dulls discernment, making it harder to recognize when an opportunity aligns with your purpose or merely exploits your availability. When your time is consistently given away, its value diminishes in the eyes of others, reinforcing the belief that it can be taken without acknowledgement or gratitude. Your voice, once clear and decisive, becomes cautious and hesitant, shaped by the need to maintain approval rather than communicate truth. This erosion of boundaries teaches others how to bypass your needs, leaving you overextended, unheard, and emotionally depleted. What began as politeness transforms into an unspoken agreement that your presence exists for convenience rather than contribution. Growth disrupts familiarity, and anything that disrupts familiarity naturally invites resistance from both the internal mind and the external environment. When a person begins to change, those who benefited from the old version often respond with criticism, not because the growth is wrong, but because it alters established expectations and dynamics. Discomfort emerges as a signal that limits are being stretched, beliefs are being challenged, and identity is being upgraded beyond what once felt safe or manageable. Resistance is frequently mistaken for a warning to stop, yet it often appears precisely when a person is moving closer to truth, clarity, and self-alignment. Criticism can feel personal, but it usually reflects the observer's own fear of change, highlighting the contrast between movement and stagnation. Internal doubt intensifies during growth because the mind prefers certainty over progress, even when that certainty is rooted in limitation. Emotional unease surfaces as old habits lose their grip, creating a temporary gap between who a person was and who they are becoming. Progress requires tension, much like muscle development requires strain, and without that pressure, transformation cannot occur. Moments of isolation or misunderstanding often accompany alignment, as clarity separates what belongs from what no longer fits. What feels like struggle is frequently evidence that a deeper standard, stronger identity, and clearer direction are being formed. Self-respect forms the foundation of genuine influence because people respond to those who demonstrate confidence rooted in internal alignment rather than external validation. When a person upholds clear standards, their behavior becomes predictable in the strongest sense, creating trust through consistency and integrity. Decisiveness communicates certainty, and certainty naturally attracts attention, respect, and followership without the need for explanation or persuasion. Approval-seeking shifts focus outward, causing actions to fluctuate. Based on reactions, which weakens presence and dilutes authority. People-pleasing often sacrifices clarity for comfort, but comfort does not inspire confidence or leadership in others. Standards act as filters, determining what is allowed, accepted, or rejected, and those filters define how others engage, listen, and respond. Decisions made with conviction reduce confusion and hesitation, reinforcing the perception of competence and self-mastery. Influence grows when boundaries are enforced calmly and consistently, signaling that values are not negotiable. Seeking approval places power in the hands of others, while self-respect reclaims that power through intentional choice. Those who lead with standards and decisiveness shape environments, expectations, and outcomes without needing permission. Transformation begins the moment comfort is no longer treated as the highest priority and conviction is allowed to guide decisions, even when the outcome feels uncertain. Choosing conviction requires an internal shift, where values become more important than validation and truth outweighs the desire to be liked. Discomfort often marks the crossing point between intention and action, signaling that old patterns are being interrupted and replaced. Decisive action collapses hesitation, forcing clarity where overthinking once delayed progress and drained momentum. When action is taken without apology, it affirms self-respect and communicates that boundaries, goals, and standards are not negotiable. Apologies for growth weaken resolve, while ownership of choices strengthens identity and personal authority. Each decisive step builds evidence of capability, reinforcing confidence through experience rather than affirmation. Momentum increases as action replaces explanation, allowing results to speak louder than justification. The gap between who a person has been and who they are. Becoming begins to close as conviction shapes behavior. What once felt risky becomes necessary as purpose overrides comfort.